You ready to go? Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me here today. It's my pleasure to get to speak to you all and to talk to you about creating a culture of health disparity knowledge. As I look around the room, I see that we primarily have a white audience, so that's what happens a lot of times. But we still need to look at cultural diversity, and people automatically think race when you start to talk about diversity and that sort of thing, but really it covers a magnitude of other things. It covers, being poor, being from a different country, being from a different side of town, being from across the tracks, being part of an elite group or not, being part of a clique. So lots of things come into play when we're talking about this. I want to talk a little bit about how we all need to focus on this, and particularly now, how many people feel like, nobody can say anything anymore because it's misconstrued and taken the wrong way. You have to be so careful, and I heard just the end of the conversation. So, for example, you don't dare tell a woman she has on a pretty dress or that she looks pretty because, that's going to be misconstrued. And don't dare tell a person, I'm really liking that kind of music because that's going to be misconstrued. So all of those things is things that we have to take into account in our daily life. So I want to talk to you a little bit. I am from the March of Dimes, and I do want to talk to you a little bit about why March of Dimes is involved in this, why we look at what we look at. So first of all, March of Dimes has a well over $75 million campaign that is looking at premature birth. And at premature birth, it lends to other things that carry on throughout our lives. Premature birth and its complications are the largest contributors to infant death, and they can also cause long-term health problems. These are things like cerebral palsy, intellectual disabilities, chronic lung disease, blindness, hearing loss. People think, oh, my baby's going to be born, it'll stay in the NICU for a little bit and then everybody will go home and it'll be fine. Well, sometimes that's the case, but many, many times that is not the case. And we have lots of increasing rates, and especially in communities of color. Again, I just want to point out that sometimes color has also been equated and is very similar to some of the factors in poor communities. Babies have a higher chance of being premature birth, of being born premature, based solely though on their race or ethnicity and their zip code. So if you're of color and poor, it's kind of a double whammy there. It costs about $26 billion in excess annually each year for the health and societal cost. And you can say, well, my babies weren't premature or whatever, but trust me, we are all bearing that cost. We are bearing that cost either through the health of our private insurance or through Medicaid. So we are all bearing that cost. So it really is something that affects all of us. Many women do not get the evidence-based information that they need or the care to help them prevent preterm birth. And again, especially if you're a woman of color, something that we have realized recently that we're starting to work on is women of the opioid crisis, women who have babies that are born, NAS babies, neonatal abstinence babies. So some of those folks aren't getting the care. But it is something that we all need to look at. If you look at the preterm birth curve, this is 2016 data. We have just been given 2017 data, and for the last 2 or 3 years, it is starting to rise again. We think a lot of this is because of the opioid and other drug crisis, but something else I will tell you, if you're working in the school system, is if you take the rates of ADHD and put it next to a line of preterm birth, you will see almost the exact same rates and the exact same curvature. preterm birth rates, again, are increasing for everyone, but especially for women of color. You can see here that the whites have increased, blacks, Hispanics, Asian Pacific Islanders, American Indian, and Alaska Native. So you can see here that everybody's rate is increasing. Women of color are up to 50% more likely to give birth prematurely. And this is women who live in the same areas, who have otherwise same health and everything else. So there is something that is going on here, and March of Dimes research centers work very hard at trying to find out why and what is going on with that. So we have almost twice the rate of whites do in the African American community. Babies born to women of color can face up to 130% higher infant death rate. So even if you say, well, you know, I'm not a woman of color, my children are, it's still our problem because we're still paying for this, not to mention what's going on when these children, you know, they're going to school with their children, you know, that we're having to teach these children. Everybody is affected, all of us. In this country, black women have maternal death rates over 3 times higher than that of white women. This is a serious problem that, again, all of us need to look at. You should not be dying in this country for the simple reason that you are having a baby. And if you look here, the 12.7, 14.4, and then you look at 43.5, that is a lot of women, and something is wrong. Health equity is everyone has the same opportunities to be healthy. And we know in this country, it is not true. It is absolutely not true. Equity is giving everyone a box, saying, okay, well, here's everybody a box. And equality is saying that everybody is starting from the same place, which would look more like that. But we all know that in reality, it really looks more like your far right here. That's what it really looks like, is people do not have the same beginning. You know, if you're born in rural Harlan County and, you know, your parents don't have a job and, you know, none of your family work and you don't have indoor plumbing, you're not going to get the same outcomes immediately that you are in a 2-parent family who lives in a nice home, in a nice neighborhood, who doesn't have any problem paying their bills and can buy groceries regularly. Health disparities are persistent, avoidable, and therefore unfair health differences between socially advantaged and socially disadvantaged groups, and that's what I was just talking about. There are many axes of inequity, and again, we're not just talking about, you know, a race thing at all. We can talk about race, gender, you know, everybody is now. There was something else added, and I thought I need to look that up because I don't even know what that is. And I can't even remember what the word was now, but you know, when we're talking about the LGBT community and all that, and I wish I would have written that word down because there was something else, and I was like, well, I don't even know what that is, so I probably need to learn that. You know, because if somebody comes to me and says that, I don't want to go, well, I don't know what that is. So that's the other thing, you know, trying to keep abreast of everything that's going on. Looking at your ethnicity, certainly. Looking at your labor roles and your social class markers, you know, are your parents doctors and lawyers? You know, do they work in a coal mine? You know, is your mother a stripper? Is, you know, all of these things to be able to look at. And again, your sexual orientation and gender identity. Geography, where you live. Well, you know, things have kind of switched. You know, when I was a little girl, the rich people lived in town, and us poor people lived out in the county. Well, now it's flipped. You know, the rich people now live out in the county in beautiful houses and, you know, on 10 acres, and now the poor people live downtown. So it's interesting how that's flipped. Or religion, you know, are you being, you know, are you a Buddhist? Are you a Christian? You know, whatever this may be, to keep in mind that everybody is different and people's attitudes are different, and their beliefs and their way, or your incarceration history. I know someone who has been incarcerated who can never again, they have a lot of problems no matter what, no matter how many children they have, no matter how long, they can never live in housing. They can get no help with housing because of something that happened, 20 years ago when they were 18 years old. So we have to look at these things with our clients. There are multiple factors, again, that influence our health. They're our physical environment, our social environment, our individual behavior, our biology and genetics, the kind of health care that we get. I like this cartoon. It talks about, and I think, if you ever watch the news, you can see this plainly. Somebody rich is up there and he's got all this greed and stuff, and he's going, well, I left you half. Well, the half has to be shared, by the rest of us, by the people who are poor, so it's really not fair. He might think it's fair because he gave away half of his, but really it's not fair because, we're having to divide that many, many, many times over. Infant mortality is another thing that March of Dimes looks at and that we all need to look at and be concerned, and that's death of a live born infant in the first year of life. In the U.S., 6 babies die of every 1,000 who are born alive die before their first birthday. And again, we all share the price of that, whether it's in counseling later for the mother, whether it's the toll on the family, whether it's the breakup of the family because of the crisis, whatever it is, we all look at that. And we, despite spending most on health care, we spend more than any other country on health care, we are behind 26 other industrialized countries in infant mortality. A woman should not be dying in the United States and have a better outcome in Bangladesh. That is ridiculous. So those are important things that we work on. The leading causes of infant mortality is certainly congenital anomalies, preterm delivery, and that's babies born prior to 37 weeks, low birth weight. How many of you all, have y'all heard a lot about the ACEs and how you grow up, the adverse effects during your childhood, and we're starting to learn more about that and look at the life course perspective. Of course, it doesn't apply in every case because, I should have been dead 30 years ago, if you look at all those, and it doesn't apply in every case, but oftentimes, and, evidence has shown us that is what happens in a lot of times. Before my career in March of Dimes, I did a lot of counseling and working with families and working with substance abuse. And I had five generations of women who lived in the housing project. 5 generations. It was great granny, grandmama, 16-year-old girl who just had a baby. And they all had their own apartment. So it is passed from generation to generation. So we have to get some information in there and work on these issues. In adulthood, this can cause cardiovascular disease, diabetes, hypertension. Everybody I talk to is a diabetic. It is very serious, especially in Kentucky. Bless our heart, we're in the top 10 for everything. Obesity, diabetes, all of these, yes. So it would be nice to not be in the top half for everybody. High blood pressure, we just have a lot going, we have a lot against us. So again, looking at the life course perspective, looking at the baby's birth weight, how old were you when you were born? Were you preterm? Were you low birth weight? Looking at your fetal growth and your gestational age. And looking over your life course, did your parents grow up in certain situations? Did you grow up in a 2-parent home? We did this thing called it was a walk to show people, where they came from. It was a reality walk. So I was in a group of tons of professionals. This was in Washington, D.C., and we all did this group. Well, it was myself and another African American lady, and we were way behind because it asked things like, did you grow up in a home with a two-parent family? Did your family take vacations every year? Things like that. And I thought, well, who did that? Uppity people did that. It wasn't people who, like us, who just live from, this week to next week, and hopefully you didn't have to put anything back at the grocery store because you'd got too much. So looking at all of these things about where we came from in our life course perspective. Kentucky, the preterm birth rate among black women is 27% higher than the rate among all other women. And this is not just a black or white thing. It's not just a disparities thing. It's things like how you're treated when you go for health care. I can tell you a personal story. I was volunteering for church, and I had to get a TB skin test because I was going to be working with some children. And I go to the health department, and I walk in. She never raises her head. What do you need? And I was like, TB skin test? And she was like, okay, fill this out. And I just thought, I'm sorry, I came for a TB skin test. I just felt very invalidated. I felt very shunned. Once she finally looked up and looked at me, I was dressed similar to this. I was going into work later that day when I got finished. And so then she had a different attitude. She spoke to me differently. So we really have to look at how we speak to people. I told a story. And the other thing is this woman could not figure out why the story was racist. So I'm going to tell you very quickly and let you figure it out. So a gentleman friend of mine, a doctor, who is at the University of Kentucky, of Louisville. Oh, that's a big faux pas. But he tells the story. He's a little short guy. Not much taller than me, so he's a little guy. So he tells the story of being on an airplane, and he's sitting up toward the front, and he has on a U of L jacket. So a woman gets on the plane, turns all the way around, and makes her way. You barely can get in a plane, much less make your way back up. So she must have been really interested in talking to him. So she comes up there and she says, "What position do you play?" And he's like looking around because, and he goes, "Me? Are you talking to me?" And she says, "Yeah, do you play basketball?" And again, he was like, "Are you talking to me?" Because he is a little fella. And he goes, No, I don't play basketball. I'm a professor there. And I work at the Kent School of Social Work. So she just couldn't believe it. So, she went on about her way and on about his way. So I told a story to my friend. And she says, "I don't see anything at all racist about that." She said, "Well, if he'd have had on a suit." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, you just made it worse. You just made it worse." So sometimes we don't even realize, that we're even being that way, And the point being, why would you assume that he was a ball player and not a professor? Because he was black? Because he was wearing, because he wasn't in a suit? I don't know. These are just things to ask yourself. So still we're concerned with preterm birth in Kentucky, and you can see some of our biggest counties here: Boone County, Christian, Fayette, Jefferson, Kenton, Warren. Warren County is the only one that's got a C, and it's not too well. So every year March of Dimes puts this report card out, and every year we get these grades, and I'm telling you, as an overall grade, Kentucky is a D, and it's hanging on by a thin thread. So we really have to continue to look at this. Again, we were doing much better, but I think a lot because of the opioid crisis and that sort of thing, and some other things, I think we're going backward. Racism, a likely fundamental cause of the nation's enduring racial and ethnic disparities in health. So whether or not we're agreeing with this, whether we're not agreeing with it, I think we can all agree that women in this country should not be dying, or their children should be dying simply because of the color of their skin. Martin Luther King said, of all the forms of inequality, injustice in healthcare is the most shocking and inhumane. And I do tend to agree with that. Racism is not about how you look. It's about how people assign meaning to how you look to them, is really about what this is. And anybody, and for example, people will, you can see people will treat you very differently. We had two opioid dependent women who had both been in recovery the same time, both around the same age, pretty young, early 30s women. One came in a suit, the other came in flip-flops and jeans with her hair pulled back. And who do you think people looked at and said, I can tell you the one in jeans and flip-flops got a lot of, I'm not sure if she's in recovery. And the other one got, a lot of comments about, well, that's great. That is great that she's turned her life around. And it can be racism simply as, it can be gender racism. How many people have ever went into substance abuse treatment? And if it's a man, people are like, well, God bless George's heart. He's finally getting some help. But if a woman goes into treatment, it's, well, look at old Mary leaving her kids and going into treatment, the drunk. It's a very different set of rules, and we have to be conscious of that, especially when we work with families, when we work in schools, when we work in healthcare, when we work in any kind of setting. Life demands or challenges that tax or exceed one's ability to cope, thereby increasing their health risk. I think we can all agree that stress certainly affects us. It does affect us. People can say, well, you just get too stressed out. Well, you're not stressed enough. Do you just not care about anything? But it affects our hormone system. And this is not just for adults. This is tiny little people. Also, this is babies. Our immune system, our epigenome system, our cardiovascular system, our respiratory system. African American pregnant women report more stressors and greater emotional distress than pregnant women from other racial groups. And we have a group right now in Louisville that is looking at this, because they were having a really hard time when they went for care, when they went for prenatal care, and these are substance using women, or trying to stop substance using. But they were having a very hard time and were treated very differently than the women who were not. Now, certainly everybody is entitled to their own opinion, and you don't have to like it, but you do have to realize that we are all here, and if you're going to be in a position of, working with families and stuff, we just really have to be conscious of what we're doing, because of a lot of the thing. I think there's a thing on Facebook that goes around about, be kind. You don't know what's going on in somebody's life. And that's really true, not just of people you serve, but of yourself and of your coworkers. There could be anything. It's hard for, for your other employers, employees, anything that you have. And I've told people it doesn't matter, how much education we give or how much counseling we give. Nobody's going to be able to be receptive of that if while they're there, they're thinking, gosh, I hope they don't turn my electricity off, before I can get back home, or golly, I'm so hungry I can't concentrate. Children, children alike, grown-ups, all of us. So this is not a those people problem, but it is an us problem. The U.S. has made a pledge for justice. The United Nations Committee for the Elimination of Racial and Ethnic Discrimination, the World Health Organization, and the Commission on Social Determinants of Health. That's a lot to say. But how do disparities arise in the first place? It's the difference in the quality of care received within the healthcare system. It's the difference in access to health care, including preventative and curative systems. It's a difference in life opportunities, exposures, and stressors that result in differences in underlying health status. There is a much greater chance that, a child born to a two-parent family of a doctor and lawyer, of that child growing up and going to college and becoming a professional, than there is of a, dirt farmer in Alabama whose wife left him, who's had to raise his children on his own. I mean, those just don't start out. We're not starting out. Remember the boxes we talked about? One person is starting out with a stack of boxes, and one person is starting out sometimes not even with a box at all. Sometimes we're just starting out on the ground or below it. So those are the things that we really want to try to equal up. So I want you to think about how biased am I. Again, this is not about just color. This can be about being poor. This can be about religion, or it can be the other way. You can look at it as, people who live in this part, people who live in that part, whatever you're exposed to. So I'm going to tell you a story. It's called The Gardener's Tale. And this is it was written by Camara Phyllis Jones, and she was at the public health practice at the Harvard School of Public Health in Boston. When I bought my new house, there were 2 large flower boxes on the front porch. When spring came, I decided to grow flowers in them. One of the boxes was empty, so I bought potting soil to fill it. We did nothing to the soil in the other box and just assumed that it was fine. Then we planted seeds from a single seed packet in the 2 boxes. The seeds that were sown in the new potting soil quickly sprang up and flourished, and all of the seeds sprouted. And the most vital towering strong and tall, and even the weak seeds made it to a middling height. However, the seeds planted in the old soil did not fare so well. Far fewer seeds sprouted, with the strong among them only making it up to a middling height, while the weak among them just died out. It turns out that the old soil was poor and rocky, in contrast to the new potting soil, which was rich and fertile. The pink seed was in the poor and rocky soil. And sure enough, what I witnessed in my own garden comes to pass in the garden of life too. All of the red flowers grew up and flourished, with the fittest growing tall and strong, and even the weakest among them making it to a fair height. But in the box with the poor rocky soil, things looked different. The weak among the pink seeds didn't even make it, and the strongest among them only grew up so high. In time, the flowers in these 2 boxes go to seed, dropping their progeny into the same soil in which they were growing. Remember where we talked about the people, the 5 generations living in the housing project. So the next year, the same thing happens with the red flowers in the rich soil growing full and vigorous and strong, while the pink flowers struggle to even survive. And the flowers go to seed, and year after year, the same thing happens. So 10 years later, a gardener comes to survey the garden. Gazing at the 2 boxes, she says, "I was right to prefer the red over the pink. Look how vibrant and beautiful the red flowers are, and look how pitiful and scrawny the pink flowers are. And I sure don't want any of that pink pollen. I prefer the red." The pink flowers have internalized the belief that red is better than pink because they look across at the other flower box and see the red flowers strong and flourishing. What are we to do if we want to put things right in this garden? Well, we could start by addressing the internalized racism of the pink flowers and tell them that pink is also beautiful, and that might make them feel better, but it will do little to change the condition in which they live. Or we could address the personally mediated racism by conducting workshops with the gardener and convince her to stop plucking the pink flowers before they've had a chance to go to seed, even though they look bad. Maybe she'll stop, or maybe she won't. Yet even if she is convinced to stop plucking the pink flowers, we still have done nothing to address the poor rocky condition of the soil in which the flowers live. What we really have to do to set things right in this garden is to address the institutionalized racism. We have to break down the boxes and mix up the soil. Or we can leave the two boxes separate but fertilize the soil until it is as rich and as fertile as the red one. When we do that, the pink flowers will grow at least as strong and vibrant as the red, and perhaps even stronger, for they have been selected for survival. And when they do, the pink flowers will no longer think that the red pollen is better than the pink, because they will look over at the red flowers and see that they are equally strong and beautiful. And although the original gardener may have to go to her grave preferring the red over the pink, the gardener's children, who grow up seeing that pink and red are equally beautiful, will be unlikely to develop the same preference for the red flowers. This story illustrates the relationship between the three levels of racism. It also highlights the fact that institutional racism is the most fundamental of the three levels and must be addressed in order for change to occur. Finally, it provides the insight that once institutionalized racism is addressed, the other levels of racism may cure themselves. Perhaps this is the most important question raised by this story, is who's the gardener? You know, is that government? Is that us? Is that, you know, who is that? So the current initiative to eliminate racial divide is the initial historical insult of separating the seeds in the first place in the two different types of soil. The contemporary structural factors of the flower boxes, which keep the soils separate. And the acts of omission is not addressing the differences between the soil over the years. And racism can also, in this flower box, you could also say there may be some pink flowers in there who go, well, don't bring any of that red pollen over here because we're going to make it just fine on our own. So you have racism going both ways, which also must be addressed. So what can we do? What can we do as just everyday people? We can address the problem at multiple levels. You know, looking at us individually, you know, looking at how biased am I? What am I doing? Do I contribute to this in any way? Do I prefer people in an Armani suit, or, you know, am I treating that person different than I treat the janitor? So it's to look at our own. Looking at our health systems. This is a big thing. For example, if you have women who dread going to their healthcare provider so badly because they're treated not nicely, then there is something wrong. You know, if you have, if you have a child who is treated so badly that they don't want to come and speak with you, there's something wrong. If we don't want to ride the bus with somebody because of the color of their skin, or where they live, or what neighborhood they're in, or because, you know, they're Jewish, or because we're a Christian, or because they're a Christian and we're not, or, you know, whatever it is that you identify, you know, these are the things that we have to address. And also to look at our wider community. And being able to look at, you know, how we can break down these walls, how we can do better things for ourselves and for our children. Dr. Art James from University from Ohio, who works with one of the March of Dimes research centers, he tells a poignant story and actually has it on tape, on film, and it's very old, it's not even recent. But there are these 3 little black girls, and they're offered baby dolls. They're offered, one baby doll they're offered is white. Another baby doll they're offered is kind of cream color, and another baby doll they're offered is very, very dark skinned. So in offering these 3 little girls this baby doll, only one chose the medium skin one, the other 2 chose the white. When asked, and these are children who have not been prepped, these are just children who are offered dolls. When asked, why did you choose the baby doll that you did? The answer was always the same, and it was because they were prettier. So even them, being their own race, decided that being white was prettier. So, you know, these children have learned this somewhere. Somewhere we've all learned what's inside us somewhere, whether it was a bad situation, whether it was our parents, whether it was our friends, whatever it is. However we feel about ourselves and other people and the world around us, you know, what we're responsible for is our interaction with them. Or maybe you've been, treated unfairly. Maybe you've been, felt like people were judging you or felt uncomfortable or any of those things. We have to address the problem at multiple levels. Again, you know, just looking at our own education, really looking at, and you know, the story I told you in the beginning, my friend who, she does lots of work in her church. She's a very kind woman. This is not a woman who you would, and who you would think would have any bias at all. And she just could not figure out why that story lent itself to to any sort of racism. She just could not figure that out. So, you know, sometimes we have to dig a little bit deeper within ourselves and within the people around us. And to be able to look at, like I said, you know, we're looking at a program in Louisville, and we're going into that community, is going into do some training with these intake folks to say, look, it doesn't matter if it's a goat, if it's a white person, if it's a person of color, you know, all intakes get treated the same. And it just goes kind of back to, anybody ever read that thing about what I learned in kindergarten? You know, I think it would do us, this nation, you know, I think it would do all of us good to go back and recognize that and look at that, because it's really just about, you know, we're here for a purpose. We're here to provide. You know, I'm pretty sure, maybe I'm wrong, and I'd like to know if I am. I'm pretty sure none of you said, boy, I'm going to do what I do and get rich and then get out. Anybody? No? So I'm guessing that's not why you went into what you do. I'm guessing it's because you are empathetic, sympathetic, caretakers who want to do the best for people, who want to help people, who want to make people's lives better. So, you know, I'm preaching to the choir here, but it really is a different time for us. It really is a different set of expectations for us, and we just have to be aware of our own consciousness in doing that. And you know, it doesn't matter how well educated you think you are, how well spoken you think you are, you know, because I'll tell you about an instance that I was very biased in. We've done a lot of work over the years in March of Dimes for smoking, for women to quit smoking. You know, we used to be, funny story, Kentucky used to go back and forth with West Virginia about who was number one in smoking. Well, about 3 years ago, they also gave me the state of West Virginia in addition to Kentucky to cover. So I'm like, well, I can always be number one now among my peers for those who are smoking. But we did a focus group. We were working with some women who were smoking while they were pregnant and did a focus group. And and I'm usually pretty good. I worked as a therapist for a long time, so there's not a lot of people, not a lot that you can say to me that shocks me, you know, because basically you just have to go, I see. And so we're in this focus group, and they were talking about smoking during pregnancy, and this one young woman says, well, I cut down to 2 packs a day. And my family said, well, Lord, no more than you're smoking, you ought to just quit. And I thought, for the love of God, how much were you smoking before you cut down to 2 packs a day? So, and I realized I'm not very good with hiding, my facial expression, because I'm sure I was like, and so we all have to be aware of that. I was just like, I just can't imagine it. I can't imagine it, how much you were smoking before. But she was so proud of herself that she had cut down to 2 packs a day. So we just have to be aware of where other people start. For her, I never did find out how much because I didn't think I could take it. But but for her, where she started and where she had cut down to was a lot of progress for her. And she was very proud of the progress she made. So, I think we have to be very careful not to, be too quick to judge or too quick to move when it kind of goes against their own kind of grain. I think we have to value all people equally. I think we have to educate ourselves and other people and recognize how racism and social inequity operate. And that could be to ourselves or to the people around us. I think we need to identify our needs and our gaps in service and resources. Advocate for all mothers, babies, and families. Activate for system change and social equality. A lot of times the systems that we work in, it has really nothing to do with us. And a good example, we when I began to learn more about this, about the systems for change, we had a big bucket of like these little balls. So everybody would come up and we'd see how many of these little balls that we could get into this bottle. Well, they didn't really fit real well into the bottle, and sometimes, the conveyor belt went faster and somebody had more balls so they could fill up the bottle. So we realized it wasn't about how many I could get in or how many you could get in or that you could get in. There was something wrong with the system. There was something wrong with the scooper, with the bottle we were trying to get them in, with how fast they come off of the conveyor belt. So it really had nothing to do with our skills. It was really about the system that we worked in. And I don't know about you all, but my goodness, we have so many systems that need to, that just need to be redone and reworked and honestly just started over. I mean, our prison system is a mess. Our healthcare system is a mess. The child support place is a mess. So many systems that we have are just a mess. But we have to, do the best we can with that. And I think it's on us. And I think the world is, I think Kentucky. I think, I think we're ready and willing to change. One of my favorite quotes by Maya Angelou. So if you're looking at what can you do, good done anywhere is good done everywhere. As long as you're breathing, it's never too late to do some good. And I love the story about the man on the beach picking up the starfish. There's a man on the beach and there's all these hundreds of starfish that have washed ashore. So the man on the beach is walking along and he's picking them up one at a time, throwing them back, picking them up one at a time and throwing them back. And then the jogger comes along and he goes, "Ma'am, what are you doing? There's way too many. You're never going to make any headway with this. Why are you even bothering?" He goes, "It's not going to make any difference." And this man goes, "Well, makes a difference to this one. And it makes a difference to this one." So even if you're just making that difference, please take care of yourself, because as providers and as caretakers yourself and as counselors and nurses and the other 42 million other roles that you play as women, as providers at whatever you do, please don't forget to take care of yourself and love yourself and be kind to yourself and take time to relax for yourself, because I bet there's probably many of you who last night thought about something you needed to do after you already went to bed. Anybody ever do that? Can't imagine. So make sure that, that you take care of yourself, you're kind to yourself, and you're kind to other people. And I'd be happy to take any questions that you have. Nothing? Are y'all just hungry and want to eat lunch? It's terrible to be the speaker before lunch and the speaker after lunch. Well, thank you all so much for your time and attention. I really appreciate it, and thank you for having me today. Thank you.